Okay, Brian, we are looking at the next two market structures. Firstly is oligopoly. So we'll get straight into looking at the characteristics, the assumptions of that model. First is that there are a few large firms. So there aren't many firms in an oligopoly. Let's think of industries like the supermarket industry, Woolworths, Coles, gaming, like game consoles. There's only a few ones. Airlines, domestic flights in Australia, there's only a few firms really doing that. So these firms can sell differentiated goods, which is the case in these industries. Pretty much the same thing, but a little bit different. Or they can be undifferentiated goods. So another oligopoly would be ExxonMobil and BP. They both produce crude oil. Okay. Next, we have the idea that they do non-price competition. So we are going to see a little bit later how all firms lose in a price war. They don't want to get into a price war with each other. So they do non-price competition. That means they compete on other things. They compete on things like quality. So, they got to make the next version of the iPhone or their smartphone. It's got to have the best camera that's ever been invented. They compete on service, R&D, I should put that in full, research and development, so making a better product, so that sort of thing, reliability, design, and advertising. So often these firms, they'll use celebrity endorsements. So you got George Clooney here promoting the Nescafe coffee pod machines. Fun fact, if you squint a lot, I look a lot like George Clooney. And another idea about oligopolies is there's this idea of mutual interdependence. What that means is that the actions of one firm affect other firms in that industry because there's only a handful of them. So what one firm does affects the behavior of the other firms, what they must do. Another characteristic is that there are high barriers to entry in an oligopoly. It is hard for a new business to enter this market. Big reason for this is economies of scale. Now that is a word you probably haven't heard before, and it's a little bit confusing because economies here, we really mean it's got the second meaning of meaning savings. That's why you have like economy seats in planes, for example. It means like you're saving money doing that. And economies of scale, what it really means is it's the competitive advantage from producing a larger quantity because it lowers your average costs. So if you produce on a large scale, you can produce for cheaper, which means you can charge a lower price, make more profits. So let's see how that works. I've got a few examples here. You'll get the point. The airline that flies to Melbourne once per day, do they have a lower cost? Or is it the airline that flies to Melbourne 10 times per day? Now, I think we know this, right? It's the one that flies 10 times. The cost of the plane, they've got to buy a plane to do the flights, right? The cost of the plane is divided by more tickets sold. The cafe that sells 10 coffees per day, do they have lower costs than the cafe that sells 300 coffees per day? So average cost of a coffee here is spread by the number of coffees. So you've got the barista there, that you're paying them $25 an hour. If they work for 10 hours, only sell 10 coffees, the cost of that coffee is at least $25 an hour. But here, when they're busy, when they're producing a lot, the cost of that labor is divided by more coffees. So they have a lower average cost. And the car maker makes 1 car per day, or the one that makes 100 cars per day. Obviously, the one that makes 100 cars. Because what they do is each part of the car is made by specialized labor, so it is cheaper. So the takeaways from this are that new firms competing on a small scale, they are unable to compete on price. It is really difficult. If you try to start an airline that only does 1 flight per day, it'll be too expensive. You can't do it. New firms need to spend huge amounts of money to compete. So airlines, you're looking at probably hundreds of millions of dollars to be able to start competing, right? Again, with the high barriers to entry, we've got branding. So the branding and advertising, Xbox, whatnot, iPhone, Samsung, they've built up customer loyalty because they've built their reputation for quality. So even if a new competitor comes along and they make a better phone, right? People just don't trust it. They haven't heard of that brand, so they just go, well, no, I'll just go for Samsung or Apple, thanks. So that branding and advertising, it does help keep other firms out of the industry. Still high barriers to entry. We've got legal barriers. So one of those is that you can get patents for things. So they're exclusive rights to sell a new invention. So this one here is about selling pharmaceutical drugs. It was a medicine. So once you invent that, your company is the only one who can sell it for, say, 10 years, whatever the period may be. This person or this firm invented the Segway, so they were the only ones who could sell it. Means that other firms can't compete, obviously. Even if they know how to build the Segway, how to produce that drug, they're not allowed to compete. We can also have things like licenses are another barrier to entry. So on a large scale, in an oligopoly sense, you can't just start a television station. You need a license. So that has to come from the government. And on a smaller scale, so these wouldn't be oligopolies as such, but they are a barrier to entry. If you want to be something like an electrician, you have to be certified. If you want to be a lawyer, you need to pass the bar exam and you need a law degree. That keeps people out of joining the industry. It's a barrier to entry. And a big one, copyright. It's sort of the same as patents. You invent a creative work, you keep the rights to it. You have the rights to those characters, for example, that you create. So no one else can make a Mickey Mouse movie that belongs to the Disney company. Okay, still on high barriers. We've got what I'll call aggressive tactics. So what happens is existing firms, they can just cut their prices too low. So when they have a new competitor try to join, they just cut their prices low. They might even make a loss in the short term to keep their competitors out, make sure their competitor can't make enough money to stay in the industry. This happened in Australia back in the 90s. An airline called Compass tried to join the domestic industry, and the existing airlines just cut their prices hard, and Compass, they couldn't compete. Another aggressive tactic. We recognize this logo, Instagram. They were a competitor to Facebook. So what did Facebook do? They bought it. They just bought Instagram, and then they didn't have to worry about them competing. So it's another way that firms can protect their area. Another barrier to entry is the control of resources. So De Beers, it's an interesting name, but they used to control almost all the diamonds in the world, all the known resources of diamonds. So that meant that they had a lot of control over price because there were no other firms who were finding diamonds, producing diamonds who could compete with them because they controlled the resources. Similar to that this is Adelaide Airport, the terminals there. To operate an airline, you have to buy terminal space. I think it's called terminal space. So these come at a premium, and airlines do not want to give these up. So that's Jetstar. Jetstar don't want to give up their terminal space. So it can be really hard if you're a new airline to come and grab some of that space in an airport. You need that space, but the other airlines do not want to give it to you. I said earlier that all firms lose in a price war. Here we're going to see why. We've got the demand curve for firm A here, and we'll see it looks a bit different. We're going to see why. We call that a kinked demand curve. We're going to see why firms will choose not to compete on price, because competitors will react and they will be worse off. So let's have a look. Let's say this is the market price, the current price. Firm A decide to raise their price. They think, oh, we can make a bit more profit. Let's raise our price. But the other firms in the oligopoly, B and C, they don't want to follow. They think, if we keep our price low, we'll gain more of the market share. And if we gain market share, we'll get customer loyalty and we'll be better off. So what happens is consumers leave firm A for firms B and C. So they raise their price, we can see, and they have a huge decrease in quantity demanded, right? Because consumers are leaving firm A for firm B and C, who are still charging that lower price. So firm A, what we see is that the decrease in quantity is proportionally more than the increase in price. What that means is that it is elastic demand, right? We learned about that previously. So what we get a firm with elastic demand at this point, raising their price. What that means is they will lose revenue. They gain some revenue from having a higher price, but they lose so much more revenue from losing the quantity sold, losing the customers. So they decrease in their total revenue. They are worse off for having raised their price. Therefore, they shouldn't do it. Right? This is the key takeaway. They raise their price to P1. Competitors won't follow. An increase in price leads to a decrease in total revenue. Therefore, we'd say that demand is elastic above this point. Okay, let's look at what happens when they lower the price. So here, firm A lowers the price. I think, oh, let's get more market share, right? Firms B and C will follow. They will also lower their price. They want to retain the market share. They're going to defend their market share. So they will lower their price as well. So lower price, they will sell a bit more. So firm A, I should still say firm A. Firm A, they will have more customers because law of demand, consumers buy a little bit more if the price is lowered. So consumers will buy a little bit more from each firm. But what will happen to firm A is that increase in quantity is proportionally less than the decrease in price, which means this acts as an inelastic demand curve here. So what we get is a decrease in firm A's total revenue because they lose all this revenue from lowering their price, but they only gain a little bit from the increase in quantity. It's all because of this change in behavior from their competitors. Firm A should not decrease the price. What we get is the conclusion that they should keep the price the same. Because what happens here, lower the price to P2, competitors will follow. Decrease in price leads to a decrease in total revenue, which means this part of the curve is inelastic. So that's why we get this shape. The common theme here, firms in oligopoly should not compete on price. Okay, that will do it for oligopolies.